Assalamu alaikum, dear students. In the current session, we would focus on the language change with particular reference to Renaissance period. I hope and expect that by the end of this session, you would have a know-how of what is the relationship between the socio-economic and political changes that were taking place with the development of English language during the Renaissance period. Well, my dear students, at the public level, a kind of consciousness was, emerging, and it had, brought certain issues of language policy to the surface, to the table. Now, for the first time, people were becoming conscious of what should be the language policies, what should happen to the development of language, what are the concerns related to that, and what steps need to be taken. The beginnings of this public discussion are evident in the 16th century defense of English and debates about orthography and the enrichment of vocabulary. These early times of modern English, this Renaissance period, is the period when, for the first time, concerns were raised about vocabulary, debates were, being held about the pronunciation of certain words, about orthography especially, that is the spellings of certain words, how to be written. Overall, the environment of the linguistic scenario was of anxiety about language policy. There was a new urgency in the second half of the 17th century regarding the policy issues. And if we look at this development from 17th century onwards to 18th century, proposals for an academy were presented. In fact, in the 20th century, as we reach till this time point, in the 20th century, we can notice that there were certain policies, language policies for former colonies of England. All this did not happen in one day. This consciousness on policy making regarding language has a long history behind. It also relates to the kind of self-consciousness that people had about the shape of English language. This concern about the shape of English language played a very, very important role in determining the future of English language. Alongside, during these times, as there were advancements in technology, growth of specialized knowledge was taking place. If there were new fields, more fields, specialized fields that were being, opened, that were now, being explored, of course, there was a need for new vocabulary in all these fields. Think of all the modern technology and all the words that have come into English language for the needs, to fulfill the gap. Also now, Latin had become less and less a vehicle of learning. If we trace the history back, if we look at the old English language history and then, early Middle English language, what we would notice is there were French and Latin languages that were dominating the discourse of education, the discourse of learning. Now, however, Latin, that mainly was a language that was a major language for writing, now it was gradually losing its, significance. There was also a rapid accumulation of new knowledge, and, because knowledge was, it was with an outburst, I would say, through the period of Renaissance, it was spreading. In all that situation, the need for, publication of books on Latin language, of course, reduced. All this process of consciousness on language had two aspects, both individual and public. On the individual level, people lift themselves into economic or intellectual social levels, in every society. When people want to belong to the people who are originally from the masses, from the middle class or the lower class, when they want to belong to the upper class, they try to copy. They not only idealize, but also they imitate the language of the upper class so that they could be related to them. So, on the individual level now, because English was the emerging language, English was the language of the people in England now in the early modern English times, with whom, prosperity, with whom modernity would be identified. So people tried to, use it. So it was actually in an effort to be identified with the educated, the learned, the upper class. On the other hand, on the public level, the language, that is the English language, it was recognized as the language of England, and it was given a standardized form and shape. And now, there were standards of grammar and of pronunciation that people would follow, and that people would try to identify for themselves and would like their language to be identified with.